The store was unusually busy for a Tuesday morning. The CEO, dressed in a simple uniform with a name tag that read "New Hire," stood behind the cash register, scanning items with practiced ease. He had been working there for 3 days now, blending in perfectly as just another employee. No one suspected a thing. His goal was simple: to understand the day-to-day operations of his company from the ground up. But what he was about to hear would shake him to his core. As he handed a receipt to a customer, he overheard a conversation that made his blood run cold. The store supervisor, a woman in her late 30s, with a sharp tone and an even sharper tongue, was talking to another employee near the break room. Their voices carried, and the CEO couldn't help but listen. "Ugh, I can't stand these old people," the supervisor said, rolling her eyes. "They're so slow. They take forever to pick out their groceries, and then they hold up the line at the register. Why don't they just shop online or something? They're such a pain." The other employee chuckled nervously, clearly uncomfortable but unwilling to speak up. The CEO froze, his hands tightening around the bag he was holding. He glanced at the elderly woman in front of him, who was fumbling with her wallet, completely unaware of the cruel words being spoken just a few feet away. "And don't even get me started on their coupons," the supervisor continued, her voice dripping with disdain. "They always have a stack of them, and half the time they're expired. It's like they're trying to waste our time." The CEO's heart sank. This wasn't just a casual complaint, it was a blatant display of disrespect for the very people who had supported the company for decades. He forced a smile as he handed the elderly woman her change, but inside, he was seething. How could someone in a leadership position think this way? And how many others in the company shared her attitude? As the day went on, the CEO couldn't shake the conversation from his mind. He watched the supervisor closely, noticing how she interacted with customers and employees alike. Her impatience was palpable, and her disdain for the elderly was evident in every word and gesture. It was clear that this wasn't an isolated incident, it was a pattern of behavior. That evening, as he sat in his car outside the store, the CEO made a decision. He couldn't let this go. He needed to see just how deep this problem ran. For the first time in years, he felt a sense of urgency that had nothing to do with profits or market share. This was about the soul of his company, and he was determined to fix it. Little did he know, this was just the beginning of a journey that would challenge everything he thought he knew about his business, and himself. The CEO drove home that night with a heavy heart. The words of the supervisor echoed in his mind, each one a painful reminder of how far his company had strayed from its roots. He thought back to the early days, when he had started the business as a small neighborhood grocery store. Back then, he knew every customer by name. He remembered the elderly couple who would come in every Sunday morning, always buying the same loaf of bread and a carton of eggs. They would chat with him about the weather, their grandchildren, and sometimes even share a recipe or two. Those interactions had been the heart of the business, the reason he had worked so hard to grow it. But now, as he sat in his quiet, spacious home, he realized how disconnected he had become. The company had grown into a national chain, with hundreds of stores and thousands of employees. He had spent years focusing on expansion, profits, and innovation, but somewhere along the way, he had lost touch with the people who mattered most, the customers and the frontline workers. The next morning, he arrived at the store early, determined to learn more. He had chosen this particular location because it was one of the busiest in the region, and he wanted to see how things operated under pressure. As he tied his apron and clocked in, he couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. He was no longer just the CEO, he was an undercover employee, and the stakes were higher than ever. The supervisor, whose name he now knew was Linda, was already barking orders at the staff. "Make sure the shelves are fully stocked by 8 a.m. And don't forget to check the expiration dates on the dairy products. We don't need any more complaints from customers." The CEO nodded along with the others, doing his best to blend in. As he worked, he observed Linda closely. She was efficient, no doubt about it, but her approach was harsh and dismissive. She had little patience for mistakes, and she didn't hesitate to publicly criticize employees who didn't meet her standards. It was clear that fear, not respect, was what kept the team in line. Throughout the day, the CEO made a point of interacting with as many customers as possible. He noticed that many of the elderly shoppers seemed hesitant, almost apologetic, as they moved through the store. One man, who looked to be in his late 70s, dropped a jar of pickles, and it shattered on the floor. Before the CEO could even react, Linda was there, scolding the man for being careless. "Sir, you need to be more careful," she said sharply. "We can't have you breaking things and creating a mess." The man apologized profusely, his face red with embarrassment. The CEO stepped in, offering to clean up the mess and help the man find another jar. As he did, he couldn't help but feel a surge of anger. This wasn't how customers should be treated, especially not someone who had likely been shopping at the store for years. By the end of the day, the CEO had seen enough. He knew that Linda's behavior was just the tip of the iceberg. If this was happening in one store, it was likely happening in others as well. He needed to dig deeper, to understand the full extent of the problem. But he also knew that he couldn't do it alone. He would need allies, people within the company who cared as much as he did about doing the right thing. As he left the store that evening, he made a mental list of the changes that needed to be made. Training programs, anonymous feedback systems, and a renewed focus on customer service were just the beginning. But first, he needed to gather more evidence. He needed to see just how bad things had gotten, and who was willing to stand up and make a difference. The journey was far from over, but for the first time in a long time, the CEO felt a sense of purpose. This wasn't just about saving his company, it was about restoring its soul. The next day, the CEO arrived at the store with a renewed sense of determination. He had spent the previous night thinking about the elderly man who had dropped the jar of pickles and the way Linda had treated him. It wasn't just about that one incident, it was about the countless others who had likely faced similar treatment. He wanted to understand their experiences, to hear their stories, and to see the store through their eyes. As he clocked in and took his place at the cash register, he noticed an elderly man shuffling into the store. The man moved slowly, leaning heavily on a cane, and his eyes scanned the aisles as if he were searching for something familiar. The CEO watched him for a moment, struck by the man's quiet dignity. He decided to keep an eye on him, curious to see how the staff would interact with him. The man made his way to the produce section, carefully selecting a few apples and placing them in a small basket. He then moved to the bakery, where he picked up a loaf of bread. The CEO noticed that the man seemed to be taking his time, as if he were savoring the experience. But as the minutes passed, it became clear that the man was struggling. His hands trembled as he reached for items, and he occasionally paused to catch his breath. The CEO couldn't stand by any longer. He stepped out from behind the register and approached the man. "Excuse me, sir," he said gently. "Can I help you with anything?" The man looked up, surprised but grateful. "Oh, thank you, young man," he said with a warm smile. "I'm just looking for a few things, but it's a bit harder to get around these days." The CEO nodded, his heart aching at the man's words. "Let me help you," he said, taking the basket from the man's hands. "What else do you need?" As they walked through the store together, the man began to open up. He talked about how he had been shopping at this store for over 20 years, back when it was just a small neighborhood market. He remembered the friendly faces, the personal service, and the sense of community that had once defined the place. But over the years, things had changed. The staff had become less patient, less kind, and he often felt like he was a burden just for being there. "I don't want to be a bother," the man said, his voice tinged with sadness. "But sometimes it feels like they don't want me here anymore." The CEO listened intently, his guilt growing with every word. This was his company, his responsibility, and yet he had allowed it to become a place where people like this man felt unwelcome. He wanted to apologize, to explain that he was trying to make things right, but he knew he couldn't reveal his identity, not yet. As they reached the checkout line, the CEO noticed Linda watching them with a disapproving look. She walked over, her arms crossed, and said, "Sir, you need to get back to your register." We can't have employees wandering around the store. The CEO nodded, handing the basket back to the elderly man. I'll see you at the register, he said with a reassuring smile. But as he walked away, he heard Linda mutter under her breath, these old people are always causing problems. They should just stay home. The CEO clenched his fists, struggling to keep his composure. He wanted to confront her, to demand an explanation for her cruel words, but he knew he had to be patient. He needed more evidence, more proof of the toxic culture that had taken root in his company. As he rang up the elderly man's items, he made a point of being extra kind and patient. He bagged the groceries carefully, making sure the man's cane was within reach, and even offered to help him to his car. The man thanked him, his eyes filled with gratitude, and for a moment, the CEO felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, he could turn things around. But as he watched the man drive away, he knew that this was just the beginning. There were countless others like him, customers who had been loyal to the company for years, only to be treated with indifference or outright disdain. The CEO couldn't let this continue. He had to take action, no matter how difficult it might be. That evening, as he sat in his car outside the store, he made a list of everything he had seen and heard. He documented Linda's behavior, the elderly man's story, and the overall atmosphere of the store. He knew that he couldn't fix everything overnight, but he was determined to start somewhere. And that somewhere was with the people who had been overlooked for far too long. The CEO spent the next few days quietly observing the store's operations, gathering as much information as he could. He spoke to other employees, asking subtle questions about their experiences and how they felt about the work environment. Many of them were hesitant to speak openly, but their body language and nervous glances told him everything he needed to know. Fear of retaliation kept them silent, and it was clear that Linda's harsh management style had created a culture of intimidation. One afternoon, as the store was winding down after the lunch rush, the CEO decided to test Linda's patience. He intentionally slowed down at the cash register, fumbling with the scanner and pretending to struggle with the payment system. A small line began to form, and the customers grew visibly impatient. Linda, who had been pacing the floor like a hawk, noticed immediately. "What's going on here?" she snapped, storming over to the register. "Why is this line moving so slowly?" The CEO looked up, feigning embarrassment. "I'm sorry, I'm still getting the hang of this system," he said, his voice trembling slightly. Linda rolled her eyes and let out an exasperated sigh. "You've been here for almost a week. How hard is it to scan items and take money? This isn't rocket science." The customers in line shifted uncomfortably, some of them glancing at the CEO with sympathy. One elderly woman, who had been waiting patiently, spoke up. "It's okay, dear. We all have off days." But Linda wasn't having it. "No, it's not okay," she said sharply, turning to the woman. "We have standards to maintain, and this kind of incompetence reflects poorly on the entire store." The CEO's heart raced as he watched the scene unfold. He had expected Linda to be harsh, but the way she spoke to the elderly woman, a customer who had done nothing wrong, was beyond unacceptable. He clenched his fists under the counter, forcing himself to stay calm. "I'll try to speed up," he said quietly, avoiding Linda's gaze. But Linda wasn't finished. "You'd better," she said, her voice dripping with disdain. "If I see this kind of performance again, I'll have no choice but to write you up. We don't have room for slackers here." The CEO nodded, his jaw tight. He finished ringing up the customers as quickly as he could, his mind racing with anger and frustration. How could someone in a leadership position treat people this way? And how many others had been subjected to her cruelty? As the store emptied out, the CEO approached one of the other cashiers, a young woman who had been working there for a few months. "Does she always talk to people like that?" he asked, keeping his voice low. The cashier glanced around nervously before answering. "Yeah, pretty much. She's always on edge, and she takes it out on everyone, customers, employees, doesn't matter. It's like she enjoys making people feel small." The CEO's stomach churned. He had heard enough. It was time to take action. That evening, he called a trusted advisor from the company's headquarters. "I need you to pull the records for this store," he said. "I want to see everything: employee turnover rates, customer complaints, performance reviews. And I need it done discreetly. No one can know I'm looking into this." Over the next few days, the CEO continued to gather evidence. He documented every incident of mistreatment he witnessed, from Linda's harsh words to the way she ignored customers who needed assistance. He also spoke to more employees, encouraging them to share their experiences. Slowly but surely, a picture began to emerge, a picture of a store that had lost its way, where profit margins mattered more than people. One afternoon, as he was restocking shelves, he overheard Linda talking to another manager. "I don't know why corporate keeps pushing this customer-first nonsense," she said with a scoff. "As long as the numbers look good, they don't care how we get there." The CEO's blood boiled. He had worked tirelessly to build a company that valued its customers and employees, and yet here was someone in a position of authority openly mocking those values. It was clear that Linda wasn't just a bad apple, she was a symptom of a much larger problem. That night, as he sat in his car outside the store, the CEO made a decision. He couldn't wait any longer. He needed to confront Linda and put an end to her toxic behavior. But he also knew that he had to be careful. If he acted too soon, without enough evidence, she could twist the situation to her advantage. He needed to be strategic. The next morning, he arrived at the store early, his mind focused and his resolve unwavering. He knew that the road ahead would be difficult, but he was ready to face it head-on. This wasn't just about one supervisor or one store, it was about the soul of his company. And he was determined to fight for it. The CEO spent the next few days meticulously documenting every interaction he had with Linda and the other employees. He recorded her harsh words, her dismissive attitude toward customers, and the fear she instilled in her team. He also reached out to a few trusted employees, encouraging them to share their experiences. Slowly but surely, he began to piece together a clear picture of the toxic environment that had taken root in the store. One evening, after the store had closed, he sat down with one of the longest-serving employees, a woman in her 50s who had been with the company for over a decade. She had always been quiet and reserved, but the CEO sensed that she had a lot to say. "Can I ask you something?" he said, keeping his voice low. "What's it really like working here?" The woman hesitated, glancing around to make sure no one else was within earshot. "It's not easy," she admitted. "Linda runs this place like a dictator. If you don't do exactly what she says, when she says it, she'll make your life miserable. And if you try to speak up, she'll find a way to punish you." The CEO nodded, his heart heavy. "Has anyone ever reported her behavior?" The woman shook her head. "A few people have tried, but nothing ever happens. It's like she's untouchable. And after a while, you just learn to keep your head down and do your job." The CEO thanked her for her honesty and promised that things would change. As he left the store that night, he felt a mix of anger and determination. He had built this company from the ground up, and he couldn't let it be destroyed from within. The next day, he decided to take a bold step. He revealed his true identity to one of the employees, a young man who had shown kindness and integrity during his time undercover. The employee's eyes widened in shock as the CEO explained why he was there and what he had witnessed. "I need your help," the CEO said. "I can't fix this alone. I need people like you to stand up and speak out." The young man nodded, his expression serious. "I'll do whatever I can," he said. "This store, it used to feel like a family. But now it's just a place where people come to work and hope they don't get yelled at." With the young man's help, the CEO began to gather more evidence. They spoke to other employees, many of whom were eager to share their stories now that they knew someone was listening. They also reviewed customer complaints, which painted a damning picture of the store's decline. The CEO was shocked to see how many people had stopped shopping there because of the poor service and hostile atmosphere. One afternoon, as he was reviewing the records, he came across a particularly troubling complaint. An elderly woman had written to corporate, describing how she had been treated rudely by a supervisor and how it had made her feel unwelcome in a store she had been shopping at for years. The CEO's heart sank as he realized that this was just one of many similar stories. He knew it was time to act. He called an emergency meeting with the store's management team, including Linda. As they gathered in the small, windowless conference room, the tension was palpable. Linda sat with her arms crossed, her expression one of barely concealed annoyance. The CEO began by playing back some of the recordings he had made, Linda berating an employee, mocking an elderly customer, and openly dismissing the company's values. The room fell silent as the gravity of the situation sank in. "This is unacceptable," the CEO said, his voice firm. "This kind of behavior has no place in our company. We are supposed to be a place where people feel welcome, where they are treated with respect and kindness. But instead, we have created an environment of fear and hostility." Linda's face turned red with anger. "This is ridiculous," she snapped. "I run a tight ship because I have to. If I didn't, this place would fall apart." The CEO shook his head. "Running a tight ship doesn't mean treating people like they don't matter. It doesn't mean belittling customers or intimidating employees. That's not leadership, that's bullying." The other managers shifted uncomfortably in their seats, avoiding Linda's gaze. It was clear that they had been aware of her behavior but had chosen to look the other way. The CEO took a deep breath. "Effective immediately, Linda is suspended pending further investigation. We will be conducting a thorough review of this store's operations, and we will be making changes to ensure that this kind of behavior never happens again." Linda stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "You can't do this," she said, her voice shaking with rage. "I've been running this store for years. I've made this company millions." The CEO met her gaze, his expression unwavering. "This company was built on values that you have clearly forgotten. And if we have to lose millions to get back to those values, then so be it." As Linda stormed out of the room, the CEO turned to the other managers. "This is a wake-up call," he said. "We have a lot of work to do, but I believe we can turn this around. Together." The room was silent, but the CEO could see the relief in their eyes. For the first time in a long time, they felt hope. The days following Linda's suspension were tense but transformative. The store felt different, lighter, as if a heavy cloud had been lifted. Employees who had once moved through their shifts with quiet resignation now exchanged tentative smiles and small talk. Customers, too, seemed to notice the shift. The atmosphere was warmer, more welcoming, and the CEO could see the beginnings of the change he had hoped for. But he knew this was just the start. Suspending Linda was a necessary step, but it wasn't enough to fix the deep-rooted issues that had plagued the store. He needed to address the systemic problems head-on and ensure that the values he had built the company on were not just words on paper but actions in practice. The CEO called a company-wide meeting, inviting every employee from the store to attend. He wanted to be transparent about what had happened and what steps would be taken moving forward. As the staff gathered in the store's break room, the air was thick with curiosity and apprehension. Many of them had never seen the CEO in person, and his presence was both intimidating and inspiring. He began by addressing the elephant in the room. "Some of you may have heard that Linda has been suspended," he said, his voice calm but firm. "This decision was not made lightly, but it was necessary. The behavior I witnessed, and that many of you have experienced, goes against everything this company stands for. It's not just about breaking rules, it's about breaking trust. And trust is something we cannot afford to lose." He paused, letting his words sink in. The employees exchanged glances, some nodding in agreement, others looking down at their hands. The CEO continued, "I want to be clear, this is not just about one person. This is about a culture that has allowed this kind of behavior to persist. And it's my responsibility to fix it." He outlined his plan for change, which included new training programs focused on empathy, communication, and customer service. He also announced the creation of an anonymous feedback system, where employees could report issues without fear of retaliation. Your voices matter, he said. And I want to hear them, not just the good, but the bad and the ugly too. Because that's how we grow. The room was silent for a moment, and then a young employee raised her hand. What if things go back to the way they were, she asked, her voice trembling. What if nothing really changes? The CEO nodded, acknowledging her concern. That's a fair question, he said. And the truth is, change won't happen overnight. It's going to take time, and it's going to take effort from all of us. But I promise you this, I'm not going anywhere. I'll be here, working alongside you, to make sure we get this right. His words seemed to resonate with the group. For the first time in a long time, they felt seen and heard. The CEO could see the hope in their eyes, and it fueled his determination to see this through. Over the next few weeks, the CEO immersed himself in the day-to-day operations of the store. He worked shifts at the cash register, stocked shelves, and even helped clean up spills. He made a point of talking to every employee, learning their names, their stories, and their ideas for how to improve the store. He also spent time with customers, listening to their feedback and addressing their concerns. One afternoon, as he was helping an elderly woman carry her groceries to her car, she turned to him and said, "You know, I stopped coming here for a while. It just didn't feel the same. But lately, it feels like the old store again. Like a place where people care." Her words stayed with him long after she drove away. They were a reminder of why he had started this journey in the first place, not just to fix a broken system, but to reconnect with the people who had made his company what it was. But the road ahead was still long. The CEO knew that changing a culture wasn't just about implementing new policies, it was about changing hearts and minds. And that would take time, patience, and a lot of hard work. As he locked up the store that evening, he felt a sense of cautious optimism. They had taken the first steps, but there was still so much to do. The turning point had come, but the real work was just beginning. The weeks that followed the company-wide meeting were a whirlwind of activity. The CEO's presence in the store became a constant, and his hands-on approach inspired both employees and customers alike. He wasn't just there to oversee changes, he was there to be part of them. From early mornings unloading delivery trucks to late nights reviewing feedback forms, he worked tirelessly to ensure that the store was moving in the right direction. One of the first changes he implemented was a series of training workshops. These weren't the dry corporate seminars that employees had come to dread. Instead, they were interactive sessions designed to foster empathy, teamwork, and a renewed sense of purpose. The CEO even participated in some of them, sitting alongside employees and listening to their perspectives. One workshop focused on customer service, with role-playing exercises that helped employees understand the challenges faced by elderly shoppers. Another addressed workplace communication, teaching staff how to resolve conflicts respectfully and constructively. The feedback from employees was overwhelmingly positive. "I've worked here for 5 years, and this is the first time I've felt like my voice matters," one employee said during a training session. "It's like we're finally being treated like people, not just workers." The CEO also introduced a new recognition program to celebrate employees who went above and beyond. Each week, a customer hero was chosen based on nominations from both staff and shoppers. The winner received a small bonus and a certificate, but more importantly, they were publicly acknowledged for their contributions. It was a simple idea, but it had a profound impact on morale. Customers began to notice the changes too. The store felt brighter, more welcoming, and the staff seemed genuinely happy to be there. One elderly man, who had been a regular customer for decades, approached the CEO one afternoon. "I don't know what you've done," he said with a smile, "but this place feels like home again." "Thank you." The CEO thanked him, but inside, he knew the credit belonged to the employees. They were the ones who had embraced the changes and worked hard to make them a reality. He was just there to guide them. But not everything was smooth sailing. Some employees were resistant to the new initiatives, skeptical that the changes would last. "This is just a phase," one cashier muttered to a coworker. "Once the CEO leaves, things will go back to the way they were." The CEO overheard the comment and made a mental note to address it. He knew that skepticism was natural, especially after years of feeling undervalued. But he was determined to prove that this wasn't just a temporary fix, it was a new way of doing business. One of the biggest challenges was finding a replacement for Linda. The CEO knew that the new supervisor would play a crucial role in maintaining the store's culture, so he took his time with the hiring process. He interviewed several candidates, but none of them felt like the right fit. Then, one day, an internal candidate stepped forward, a soft-spoken but confident woman who had been with the company for over a decade. She had worked in almost every department and had a reputation for being fair, kind, and deeply committed to the store's success. The CEO offered her the position on the spot. "You're exactly what this store needs," he said. "Someone who cares about the people as much as the profits." She accepted the role with humility and immediately set to work building trust with the team. Her leadership style was a stark contrast to Linda's. She led by example, listened to feedback, and always put people first. Under her guidance, the store began to thrive in ways it hadn't in years. But the CEO knew that the work wasn't done. He expanded the changes to other stores in the region, sending teams of trainers and managers to share what they had learned. He also launched a company-wide initiative to prioritize customer and employee satisfaction over profit margins. It was a risky move, but he believed it was the right one. As the months passed, the store became a model for the rest of the company. Sales improved, employee turnover dropped, and customer loyalty soared. But for the CEO, the most rewarding part was seeing the smiles on people's faces, both the employees who felt valued and the customers who felt welcomed. One evening, as he was closing up the store, he noticed a group of employees laughing together in the break room. It was a simple moment, but it filled him with pride. This was the kind of culture he had always envisioned, a place where people could work, grow, and thrive together. But even as he celebrated the progress, he knew there was still more to do. The journey wasn't over, it was just entering a new chapter. And he was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The CEO stood at the front of the store, watching as customers bustled about, their carts filled with groceries. The atmosphere was lively but calm, a far cry from the tension that had once filled the air. He took a deep breath, savoring the moment. The store had come a long way, but there was one thing left to do, something he had been putting off for too long. He had arranged a small gathering in the store's community room, inviting a group of elderly customers who had been regulars for years. Many of them had stopped shopping at the store during its darker days, but they had slowly returned as word spread about the changes. The CEO wanted to personally apologize to them, not just for the way they had been treated, but for the fact that it had taken him so long to notice. As the customers filed into the room, the CEO greeted each one with a handshake and a warm smile. He recognized many of them from his time undercover, and their faces lit up when they realized who he was. "You're the nice cashier," one woman exclaimed. "I had no idea you were the CEO." He chuckled, feeling a mix of pride and humility. "I wanted to see things from the ground up," he explained. "And I'm so glad I did, because it showed me what really matters." When everyone was seated, the CEO stepped to the front of the room. "Thank you all for coming," he began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "I asked you here today because I owe you an apology. For too long, this store, and by extension, this company, failed you. We lost sight of what made us special, and in doing so, we let you down." He paused, looking around the room. The faces staring back at him were kind but curious, and he could see the years of loyalty and patience in their eyes. "I know that many of you have been shopping here for decades," he continued. "You supported us through good times and bad, and you deserved better than what we gave you. You deserved to be treated with respect, kindness, and dignity. And for the times we fell short of that, I am truly sorry." The room was silent for a moment, and then one man spoke up. "We appreciate the apology," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "But what matters most is what you do next. Words are nice, but actions speak louder." The CEO nodded, his respect for the man growing. "You're absolutely right," he said. "And that's why we've made and will continue to make changes to ensure that this never happens again. We're retraining our staff, improving our customer service, and most importantly, listening to your feedback. Because at the end of the day, this store isn't just a business, it's a community. And you are the heart of that community. The room erupted into applause, and the CEO felt a lump form in his throat. He hadn't expected such a warm response, but it reminded him of why he had started this journey in the first place. These people weren't just customers, they were neighbors, friends, and family. And they deserved nothing less than the best. After the gathering, the CEO spent time talking to each of the customers individually, listening to their stories and ideas. One woman shared how she had started shopping at the store with her late husband, and how it had become a place of comfort for her after he passed away. Another man talked about how much he appreciated the small acts of kindness, like when an employee helped him carry his groceries to his car. Their stories touched him deeply, and he promised to share them with the staff as a reminder of why their work mattered. As the last customer left, the CEO felt a sense of closure. He had done what he set out to do: apologize, make amends, and set the store on a better path. But he also knew that the work wasn't over. Apologies were important, but they were just the beginning. The real challenge was maintaining the changes and ensuring that the store continued to grow and improve. That evening, as he locked up the store, he took a moment to reflect on how far they had come. The shelves were stocked, the floors were clean, and the employees were smiling. But more than that, the store felt alive, like a place where people could come together, not just to shop, but to connect. He knew there would be challenges ahead, but he was ready to face them. Because this wasn't just about running a business anymore. It was about building something meaningful, something that would last. The CEO stood outside the store one crisp autumn morning, watching as the first customers of the day trickled in. The air was filled with the familiar sounds of shopping carts rattling, doors sliding open, and friendly greetings exchanged. It had been nearly a year since he had first gone undercover as a cashier, and the transformation of the store, and the company, was nothing short of remarkable. Sales were up, employee morale was at an all-time high, and customer loyalty had been restored. But for the CEO, the true measure of success wasn't in the numbers. It was in the smiles he saw on people's faces, the laughter he heard in the break room, and the sense of community that had been rekindled. The store had become more than just a place to buy groceries, it had become a gathering spot, a hub of connection and kindness. As he walked through the aisles, he couldn't help but reflect on the journey that had brought them here. It hadn't been easy. There had been moments of doubt, frustration, and even fear. But through it all, he had learned one invaluable lesson: the heart of any business is its people. Not the profits, not the products, but the people, the employees who work tirelessly behind the scenes and the customers who walk through the doors every day. He stopped by the bakery section, where a young employee was helping an elderly woman choose a loaf of bread. The interaction was warm and genuine, a far cry from the impatience and disdain he had witnessed a year ago. The CEO smiled, feeling a swell of pride. This was the culture he had fought to create, a culture of respect, empathy, and care. Later that day, he gathered the staff for a special meeting. He wanted to thank them for their hard work and dedication, but he also wanted to share the lessons he had learned along the way. As they gathered in the break room, he stood before them, his heart full. "When I first came here as a cashier," he began, "I had no idea what I was getting into. I thought I was just here to observe, to see how things were running. But what I found was so much more than that. I found a store that had lost its way, a team that felt undervalued, and customers who felt unwelcome. And I realized that it was my fault. I had been so focused on growing the company that I had forgotten what made it special in the first place." He paused, looking around the room. The employees were listening intently, their faces a mix of curiosity and emotion. "But you, all of you, reminded me of what really matters. You showed me that a business isn't just about making money. It's about making a difference. It's about creating a place where people feel seen, heard, and valued. And that's exactly what you've done." He went on to share stories from his time undercover, the elderly man who had dropped the jar of pickles, the woman who had stopped shopping at the store because of poor treatment, the employees who had bravely shared their experiences. Each story was a reminder of why they had worked so hard to make things right. "I know that change isn't easy," he said. "It takes courage, patience, and a lot of hard work. But look at what we've accomplished together. We've created a store that we can all be proud of, a store that reflects the values we hold dear. And that's something worth celebrating." The room erupted into applause, and the CEO felt a surge of gratitude. These people, his team, had been the driving force behind the transformation. They had embraced the changes, supported one another, and worked tirelessly to create a better environment for everyone. They were the true heroes of the story. As the meeting came to an end, the CEO handed out small tokens of appreciation, personalized notes and gift cards to thank each employee for their contributions. But more than the gifts, it was his words that left the biggest impact. "You've shown me what it means to lead with heart," he said. "And I will carry that lesson with me for the rest of my life." That evening, as he locked up the store and walked to his car, the CEO felt a deep sense of fulfillment. The journey had been long and challenging, but it had also been incredibly rewarding. He had learned that true success isn't measured by profits or market share, but by the lives you touch and the difference you make. As he drove home, he thought about the future. There were still challenges ahead, and the work of maintaining the store's culture would never truly be done. But he was ready to face whatever came next, knowing that he had built something meaningful, something that would endure. And as he looked in the rearview mirror, he saw not just a CEO, but a leader who had learned to lead with humility, compassion, and heart. That, he realized, was the greatest lesson of all.